Well, basically it should be focused on how we can enable individuals on the spectrum to achieve their full potential. Because with certain leaflets, I've got here a leaflet called Untapped Talent, and only 15% of adults on the spectrum are in full-time employment. And one possible research project that I discussed at the workshop would be to investigate the factors that determine whether or not someone on the autism spectrum succeeds in obtaining suitable employment. The idea was to go round all the autism groups with a questionnaire that they can fill in anonymously if they wish, and ask various questions about their history, like how the age at which they were diagnosed, what support they did and didn't receive, whether they went to a mainstream school or a special school, and so on.
I've done quite a lot of reading. I did find the workshops that we've done very useful, and I would definitely love to be more involved in research, something very useful, and maybe actually sort of having a look at the process or the journey that someone follows in getting a diagnosis, and then maybe care afterwards. Because I personally think that sometimes a lot of the medical aspects of things, they're too reactionary. They're sort of, say somebody might go in, or I'll say I've gone in for an assessment for autism, and that's all they've looked at in isolation, rather than seeing what other aspects coming off the autism or any comorbidities might affect me.
Another autism project, which I mentioned to Emma when I first met her this morning, I read a couple of years ago about something called the uncanny valley, and I read that it involves the brain's empathic circuits, which we believe are wired differently in people on the autism spectrum. So I suggested this for a research project, and Emma said that, well, she'd love to do it, but that she can't get the funding for it, is what Emma was telling me. So, but that would certainly be a very interesting research project.
I think in terms of research, a lot of the stuff is about the senses, and those things don't affect me as much as perhaps they might affect other people, and so I'm more interested in sometimes more the social side of things and about behaviour of people, and I'm quite interested in studies that look at women with Asperger's syndrome or on the autistic spectrum, because one of the reasons I didn't get diagnosed till I was 27 was because a lot of my problems had appeared that they were due to mental health issues, and I think it's very hard for people to diagnose women because their social skills are better, and it's harder to fit them into the stereotypical categories of people with autism. There's lots of people now that I've met on Facebook sites or that I've met at autism groups who are now saying that they're in their 50s and 60s and they're getting diagnoses because it wasn't even heard of when they were younger that women would have autism or that it was possible. And I think it's quite interesting how more and more women especially are getting diagnoses now, later in life, because they're only learning about autism because their children have got it. And I just think that's quite interesting. And also more and more traits are being discovered that are different for women on the spectrum than for men. And I think when I've read things that have been specifically written about women on the spectrum, I've always identified with those a lot more than the stereotypical symptoms or traits of like classic autism. I think that it's really useful that people are getting diagnoses now, but because it explains a lot to them, and having that diagnosis is really helpful for them.
Most of the problems that I would like to see solved for autistic people resolve around the interface between autistics and NTs. Get a parcel of autistic people together, they're fine because they have similarities in the way they do or don't communicate. We understand people's silences or need to go into detail because we tend to do them ourselves from time to time. What we find difficult are the things we can't get about NTs, and the assumptions they make about us based on what they perceive of their own environment, which just don't apply to us. We are the Apple Macs in the PC world. Both work fine in their own environments, but the interface is often very, very fraught, even with the fanciest of softwares. And this is pretty much where we live. Time after time after time, problems are caused for autistic people by entities assuming something or getting something wrong and then trying to cover up rather than just admitting. So really what I would like to find is the ultimate translator for NTs to stop assuming and understand where we're coming from. You guys have more of an ability to feel the fuzzy edges, not worry about it and plough on regardless. Whereas with us it has to be much, much more cut and dried. And if we don't have an explanation for something, we've got to go and search for that explanation as a matter of compulsion, if you follow me, rather than just saying, well, okay, that's fuzzy, I'll deal with that later and plough on. This is why if we get into a dialogue with, shall we say, a benefits department that doesn't work in our favour, we don't necessarily understand what's not worked because A, they've not followed the rules, but B, that's not how the rules are intended to be interpreted. So it can get very, very complicated. And certainly 90% of the support issues we got involved in at Salford Autism have been about some official somewhere having dropped a brick, and rather than pick it up, apologise and try and sort things out, they've tried to cover it with paper or excuses or make it somebody else's fault, and that's the bit we can't cope with. If people would just learn to accept that they've made a mistake, apologise, that will be accepting and we could move on. But no, they cover it up and we become the victim of the situation. And that's all Salford Autism does 9 times out of 10. Pick that little thread out, get people to agree it and say, right, now it's dealt with, everybody's happy. Simple.
Well, by researching the various ways in which autistic brains are more capable than neurotypical brains, it can give lots of autistic people ideas about how best to live their lives. Better understanding of autism for society means better integration for those autistic people who wish to be involved in it. Society itself can benefit from the original and varied ways in which the autistic mind operates. For example, seeing a solution that others may not be able to see. And simply taking part in research for the individuals can be a way to connect to other autistic people in a healthy and positive way. Many people think that autistic people all act and sound the same. This is not the case. We are as diverse as the general population. Not only are we diverse in character, but also in terms of autistic traits, and also the severity of those traits. The same is true of our talents. Understanding this diversity is the key to understanding and acceptance. It also opens the door to understanding the vast amount of new ideas that autistic people can bring to society. Specific research could include the special talents of subsections of the autistic community. For example, those with ability in maths, music, design, planning, social support, structure, psychology and other areas of interest.
Another research is to find the best way to nurture autistic talent. And I think a lot of individuals out there on the autism spectrum, especially the mute ones that self-gag, I think behind their self-gagging is a hidden, locked-in genius, which we need to unlock.